Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And a very good morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo and broadcasting on TV1 and also live on Facebook, and a little bit later on it'll be available on YouTube. And this morning we'd like to play you a little clip from yesterday's news, last night's news.
During the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration, a relative was appointed to the national airline, and by 2015, the airline has suffered a loss of 16.3 billion rupees. After the new government was elected in 2015, Ajit Dias, a good friend of the Prime Minister, was appointed as the chairman of the airline. Suren Ratwatta, the brother of Charita Ratwatta, senior advisor to the Prime Minister, was appointed as the chief executive officer of the airline. During this administration, based on friendships, the airline incurred a loss of 28.5 billion rupees last year. The then board of directors did not approve of the appointment of the CEO. However, 6 months after he was appointed, his service was made permanent based on the orders that came from temple trees. This confirmation of service comes in a backdrop where a majority of the board of directors had issued an order to suspend Ratwatta from continuing to function as the CEO. At present, a presidential commission has been appointed to investigate the fraud and corruption at Sri Lankan Airlines. At the same time, Suren Ratwatta had taken an early retirement from the post of CEO and has put forward a series of conditions. One condition is that 6 months' salary net of tax needs to be given to him. He also requests valid air tickets to travel to Australia for a period of 1 year and several other benefits. The national airline has been brought to a level where it incurred continuous losses. Therefore, in such a backdrop, what is the amount the CEO is requesting as benefits? Send us your thoughts, type news space, the amount you think he wants, and send a SMS to 7788, or visit our Facebook page or our website. A special revelation will be made tomorrow.
And yes, good morning again in case you just joined us. And our guest this morning is the State Minister of Finance, Mr. Eran Wickramaratne. Very good morning to you, Mr. Wickramaratne.
Good morning.
And I've got it right, it's State Minister, is it?
That's right.
Indeed. Thank you very much. I didn't intend, that wasn't going to be my first question, but because it is, I'll ask you. Do we actually need a national airline? Or do we need an airline? This is losing us money every blessed day, really.
Yeah, I think the question whether a country needs a national airline is not an economics and finance question alone.
Right.
I think countries have national airlines for non-economic reasons.
Right.
And if it is so decided, then you also have to decide how much you can afford.
Right.
It in terms of how much you will afford to have a national airline. If you are strictly operating an airline for economic and financial reasons, then your approach would certainly be very different.
Right.
Very different. And I think that that's a fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves.
Right.
Do we need a national airline? And if the answer is yes, then how much should we afford in terms of a national airline? The story about the Sri Lankan Airlines is not a new story.
Yes.
I remember as a child, going to the airport to see people off on the Arcelon.
That's right.
And then it went through various reiterations over the years. It changed its name, it repositioned itself in several cycles.
But the losses have been all throughout. Well, maybe
there were a few. There's an era in which they made some profits, and then we had the partnership with Emirates, in which it stabilized, and the government didn't have to bear any losses. And now we are getting into another phase where a new board has been appointed, and the restructuring of the airline is commencing again. I think I would make a wider point than the national airline. I was just looking at the expose that was on your news channel last night, which you just played. And I think the wider point is that in Sri Lanka, we have an issue of management.
Well, I was waiting quietly until you said this, Minister, because I was going to say we do appear to need a national airline, but we need professionals to run it.
Right. So we have a wider question of management, and it's not recognized that you need professional management.
Right.
We live in a country in which, teachers think that they have to run the schools.
Right.
The doctors think that they have to manage the hospitals.
Yeah.
The lawyers think that they have to manage the judicial system. Maybe pilots think that they have to run airlines. So we live in a country in which, right, we have specialists, very clever people, but they don't themselves recognize that management itself is a different skill. So if you're talking about the airline, if you were to take a lesson maybe from Malaysia, and we look at a decade ago when the Asian financial crisis hit in 2008, 2009, it went through a restructuring of the Malaysian airlines. And in the Asian crisis, very few airlines in the world broke even or even made profits, but Malaysian Airlines was one of them. And one of the lessons there was they went for a radical management change. You need people who really understand the bottom line, the profit and loss statement, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, who actually run and manage these things.
Yeah.
And then they would incorporate basically other people, the specialists in the area, for those specialized skills. And so I said that's a wider question that we need to ask ourselves. If you look at our judicial system, there are enormous delays. The average case in a recent study showed that it takes 10 years, and if you do the appeals through the appeals court and the Supreme Court, its average takes another 7 years. It's 17.5 years on a case. That's the average. That means some cases are 10 years, some cases maybe 25 or 30 years. If you take hospitals, in most countries, hospital management companies actually run hospitals. Obviously, the doctors play a very important role. So whether it's managing the judicial process, whether it's managing hospitals, whether it's managing schools, whether it's managing airlines, and we have a particular problem in the public sector, and particularly in the public sector corporations, where political interference has been there right through in Sri Lanka. And to minimize it, you need to have methods to minimize it. Now, I talked about the Malaysian Airlines case. The unfortunate part was, when Malaysia restructured it, it had to lay off a lot of people in the restructuring process because it had to make itself profitable. But because Malaysian Airlines didn't divest some of its shares and maybe have the private sector participate in the process, there was no long-term sustainability. After recovering, it went back into problems because basically it was just another state-owned enterprise where the new people coming in basically went and hired more people than had been fired in making it profitable, and it just gone back to the mess it was in.
But isn't this the almost endemic problem in our brilliant island, our wonderful, this is the land of our birth, and we are proud of everything, including when it was time to do battle in the war, the so-called war between separatist fighters and the rest of the country. We were already proud to be promoting this whole concept of it's a homegrown problem and it needs a homegrown solution, and yes, and so we did it, and some parts of the world are now not very happy and all that business. But so in the same way, we know that there's talent. Sri Lanka has definitely got talent, and so it's a little bit too much to stomach. Successive governments who come in here, and in recent times we've had the former president's brother-in-law, who's probably an accomplished planter, but he was the chairman of the airline. And then then they said that, I think even you endorsed that we had this time round we're going to have professionals, but unfortunately one of the chairmen knew how to sell a cup of coffee and so on, pretty good at that too. But sorry, but he didn't know how to run an airline. or he didn't know how to guide the running of the airline. Probably because there's no professional managers, as you say. And it's the politics. I can't see anyone coming in and wanting to make Sri Lankan Airlines meaner and leaner to be a working success in terms of finance, because the politics is so entrenched. Do you think anyone would take a chance on being re-elected by chopping off all the unwanted? The ratios, Minister, very high in terms of staff to seats at Sri Lankan Airlines, even though it's a traditional airline. What do you think? What are the chances?
Yeah, I think that in the present there has been a new board appointed, and there has been a new chairman appointed, and the chairman is expert in finance and has a successful track record, and I think there's a lot more hope, because I think we're getting the right set of skills in Ranjit Fernando being chairman at Sri Lankan Airlines. And I think that they need to be given the freedom basically to make their decisions and hire the necessary skills, because we mustn't always assume that we always have all the skills. This is also a kind of a problem that we have, that we think that we have all the skills. Generally we know everything. A lot to learn from around the world. This is nothing new. I mean, there are 200 countries and lots of them have airlines, and lots of private airlines in the world. Very few countries now own their airlines. You see, it's a private sector that actually owns their airlines. And if we, I think, give that freedom, then they can re-engineer the model as well of the airline and turn it around. But to have sustainability, as long as you have full government ownership from time to time, political parties, politicians, the powers that be will always interfere. And therefore, over time, if you want to have sustainability, you need to break that nexus.
I mean, in Britain, when they had the open skies policies and so on, and Mrs. Thatcher took Britain down the road of privatization and so on, BOAC became British Airways, and British Airways is a listed company, and it appears to be running pretty well, but it's run as a, it's not some loss-making enterprise that needs a handout every month from their treasury, and I don't think the treasury will send them any money anyway. Are we a long way off? But don't we need an airline to bring the numbers in?
No, here people could differ, because I have heard lots of people in the tourism industry say, oh, the country needs an airline because we are promoting tourism. I've heard them say that. I cannot completely agree with that statement as an economist, because if there is a demand, there will be a supply, and others will come in and fill that. So that's not to argue that we shouldn't have an airline. What I'm saying is I can't, at a conceptual and theoretical level, I don't agree with the argument. So we can have an airline, but we need to give it the freedom, basically, to make itself profitable. The airline needs to be profitable in itself. If you need subsidies for tourism, then that should come via the budget to the airline. You can't expect the airline to subsidize tourism. And I think we should separate the objectives. We should separate and be very clear what are commercial enterprises. We should be very clear where the subsidies are going, and if subsidies are going, subsidies must be in the budget, where it's coming out of the taxpayers' money, and people know that it's going for this particular purpose.
But when Emirates Airlines started its life off, it was part of the cornerstone of the success story that we now know as Dubai. And so they were in this wonderful position, the airline, that the rulers there were not really looking at a bottom line figure. Emirates is a tool in which to promote Dubai. And of course, once that objective was sort of well set, the airline has now got to have eye towards the bottom line, and so it's evolved, and Dubai is what it is. And of course, when you look at these things, we do hanker after these things and think, well, why can't that be replicated here? So what you're saying is, the people who are traveling to Sri Lanka will travel, and it doesn't matter whether it's the government that owns the airline or whether it's the private sector.
No, it doesn't really matter who owns the airline.
Right.
Because I think that if there is demand, there will be a supply.
Yeah.
And if there is a necessity for the government to think that tourism promotion would require certain routes which are not profitable, then that should come directly from the government's budget to the airline. You can't take it off the airline's budget. I think independent decision making is necessary if you really want results. Because if you don't give them the independence, right, then you're going to have the mess that you all have already had over many decades. And this mess has got compounded in many ways. We're just talking about operational matters here, but there are other matters, and I think the Presidential Commission will probably go into it, like purchase of aircrafts. They've been purchased at non-market prices.
Yes, this is it, isn't it, Minister? Because when we depart, in our country we have all these rules and regulations and processes and procedures in place. But the minute we start departing from those rules and processes and procedures, then we have trouble. And that we see that not only with the airline, but we see it across the board. And then it's almost a curse upon all of us that in Sri Lanka, our system is such that the leader, the head, the political head, let's say, makes all these sort of key decisions and then gets various committees and processes to endorse it. So you'll have a leader giving this to his friend or his family or friends and all that, and so it all becomes very messed up, and of course the people have continuously got to pay, we could but now at least, Minister, people such as you who you know your business in terms of numbers and economics and all that, and that's the problem, because there's a good perception, and well-founded one, that there are people who know and who know what they're doing and can do these things, but it appears that they're not being given enough opportunities. I'm asking you, are you being given enough opportunities to make that difference?
I would like to comment on myself,
right?
But I would say this in terms of the Ministry of Finance, which I'm now a part of.
Yeah.
That our responsibility is largely to create the macroeconomic environment. That's our responsibility. In a way, the Ministry of Finance is a coordinating ministry. And what we have done in this short period is that we have tried to tackle one of the major imbalances in the economy, which is the budget deficit. We have set ourselves the medium-term target of bringing the budget deficit down to 3.5%, and we were supposed to bring it down to 4.6% last year. But it was actually just over 5.
Right.
And the reason for that deviation was mainly because we had droughts in about 20 districts in the country, and floods also last year in certain districts of the country. So it had to do with the destruction, to do with agricultural production being down and so forth. Otherwise, we are very much on target. So this year we expect it to be around 4.6%. When we took over office, the revenues in the country were about 12% of GDP, which is very, very low.
Right.
For any country in the world, there should be a minimum of about 15% of GDP. And we have gone about systematically and carefully increasing it.
Yeah.
And we are getting to about the 12%. What does that mean? So that means that you could provide the citizens with their basic services. Apart from the armed forces, law and order, the police, the judicial systems running, health, education and social welfare are the three important things. Since our government took office, we have increased social welfare, particularly Samurdhi has been very drastically increased since we took office. We have also increased the salaries of government servants quite drastically as we came into office. These were of course in keeping with certain election promises that had been given in the period. But I think the most significant thing that we have done is we have redefined development. In the past period when people talked about development, they often talked about infrastructure. They showed a road, they showed a building, and they said this is development. And there's been a fundamental shift in that. Actually, development is about people. It has to be people-centered. So if I were to just give a very few examples of it very, very quickly, where the focus has shifted, is that if you take education, right, we have invested increasingly a higher percentage of in education as a percentage of GDP. So you have got the the closest school is the best school, Langama Pasala, Hondama Pasala kind of program. It's an infrastructure. We have gone into investing in curriculum development, in teacher training. We have invested in an insurance program called Suraksha, which is 4.5 million students have been insured. So some emphasis on education there has been. Then we have also invested heavily into health. People are living longer. When I was born, my grandparents on average lived till they were about 55, and one lived till they were 75. I mean, I attended a party of somebody last week who celebrated their 100th birthday. So people are living much longer, and health becomes important. So we have invested heavily in expansion in hospitals, hospital services, right, the health minister has invested. We have invested in bringing down basically the cost of drugs. 48 essential drugs were brought down very, very drastically, from Panadols to whether you have high blood pressure, cholesterol, all the main diseases, right? The drugs have come by a tremendous percentages. Then if people are, having problems, like cataract lenses have come by about 35 to 75%. If you are suffering from kidney failure, there has been some relief on kidney failure. If you are suffering from heart disease, you have to put stents. The prices have been drastically brought. And if you go into a government hospital, all this is given to you free. But if you go to a private hospital, you also get the benefit of it. Earlier we had limits, for example, if you had a cancer patient in your home, there was a limit of 1.5 million rupees. After that, if you turned up in a government hospital, they would say that you had to pay for the help. People who could afford would pay, others basically, we have sentenced them to death.
Four stents cost 2 million privately, by the way.
Sorry, but what is that?
4 stents cost 2 million, including the care.
But the cost of the stent itself has been brought down very, very drastically.
By the government in state hospitals.
Yes. No, even in the private sector. The price has been brought down. Yeah. And I was saying on cancer, we've removed the limit. So you could go, anybody could go, receive treatment, there is no limit. So the expenditures have tremendously increased. Then the other thing, because this human development aspect, because there was an attempt in the past period to define development as you build a highway, that's development. You put an airport in some useless location which is not utilized. I mean, if you take the Mattala airport in Hambantota, I went there in 2014. I went to the port there. That's the time that somebody really came out with a pistol threatening us and asked us, why did we come here? I actually went there to show that was a wasteful expenditure. Just 2-3 days ago, the only airline that was going into Mattala also decided to pull out of Mattala. And there is not one scheduled airline actually arriving in Mattala. These are national crimes that people could make decisions to put money where there is no economic benefit for the people in this country.
Indeed.
If we had put that money, I'm giving you an example, right? We could have put it in public transport. But before I get on to that, I want to just say on human development. The other thing that has happened is an emphasis on women and on women's education. Today the girl child or the girl student, right? And on the O-levels, on the A-levels, they're really getting ahead. If you take university admissions, almost in every faculty in this country, we have more women with the exception of a few. But when it comes to labor force participation, we have only 36% in the labor force. So what did we do just a few days ago in Parliament? We brought a new maternity benefits bill into Parliament. What was the intention? The intention was to increase labor force participation. So the young mother doesn't have to, she's now educated, she doesn't have to give up her career, she can go to work. We are encouraging people to actually provide a better working environment for these mothers. We've given her the right to breastfeed if she brings a child under 1 year. By law, we have removed the limitation of benefits at childbirth, so that they have holidays.
I hear what you say, but I mean in the last 4 minutes, I hear what you say, but we have For example, I didn't want to bring this up, but I'll bring it up now. For example, the bond. When the media first, led by us, did the first lot of exposés, if something was done about it at the time, then we would have been stuck just with the first bond, which is bad enough. Nothing would have happened the second bond. A lot of embarrassment, lots of money would have been saved. Then we have the Central Expressway. We had a minister, cabinet minister, senior man from the party, who's broken all due processes and was shown to have had meetings with contractors who had already been part of the bidding process and completely ignored the CANC and all those other rules and regulations. And now we also have the former governor of the central bank saying that the debt to GDP ratio is actually 81%, not 77.6%, as stated by the Central Bank and by the Ministry of Finance. But the Auditor General, in the notes of the Ministry of Finance accounts, makes a point that the debt is actually not as stated by the Ministry, and that there's a difference of approximately 4%, which is a lot of money. What would you have to say about that particular bit? Why is this anomaly between what the Auditor General is saying and your...
I mean, the auditor, there has been some redefinitions that have happened, not only this year, it has happened even in the past 2-3 years in the Auditor General's report. And we have to redefine it, because ultimately the Auditor General has to have the final say. Otherwise he doesn't become the Auditor General. So I think some redefinition needs to happen. But on the debt, I must say this, right? The actual debt hasn't gone up, because we haven't really taken debt for consumption. What has happened is it's got redefined again. Right? We have moved from a fixed exchange rate regime. We have moved to basically a floating market exchange rate regime. And then when you have had foreign currency debt and you have had local currency debt, and you are looking at the debt in terms of local currency, if your exchange rate, for example...
But Minister, the difference between this 4% difference is about 389 billion rupees, which is like, I think it's around $2.5 billion. That's a bit worrying, especially when the Auditor General is talking about the Ministry of Finance account.
But the Auditor General is talking about accounts for us. It's not talking about concealment. I think that's the difference. And I think that there are definitional changes that are being recommended, and I think that, as I said, the Auditor General's view prevails, that those definitional changes need to be done. Often what's happening is that, right, we are not comparing apples with apples. We are not comparing exactly what was in the past with what is in the present. And that's really what's happening. And I find it very intriguing that, people who held office in some of these things in the past, you see, and who have now moved out of those offices, right, are often coming back and basically criticizing what is being presently done by those who have present there. But I think that we need to be more professional about it. I mean, I used to be the CEO of a leading bank in the country. I've never made a comment about that bank since I left office in that bank. I think that I should leave it up to those people to take it forward. And if there were achievements or no achievements during the period that I held office, I think it's up to others to speak about it rather than myself. And I think that principle is good to be followed in professional life, even whether it's to do with the central bank, rather than former governors talk about present governors. I think we need to be about that.
Good. Now, because we run out of time, I hope that we have your assurance, and maybe your undertaking too, that you will come back on one of our other programs, because we got so much more to talk about, and we simply don't have the time. Because I hear what you're saying, but actually economically our country is facing a lot of challenges, and we need some answers. We hope that you will be able to provide those answers. We'll give you every opportunity to do so, of course. The airwaves are yours. So the people will start phoning you later on, and hopefully get you on our programs and ask you and give you time to explain what on earth is happening, Minister?
Thank you. I will certainly be back. I'll take you on your invitation, and I would like to say that the macroeconomy is in a far stronger position than it has been in several years. From the budget deficit, revenues are up, exports are up, foreign reserves are higher, foreign direct investment is at a historical high, The reserves in the country are at a historical high. So the macroeconomic fundamentals are extremely strong. It gives us space over the next 2 years to do some of the things that we had to discipline ourselves not to do to actually get to these figures.
And,
so I certainly
yes.
would want to be back on the program.
Please do, because we are concerned about various things, including this deficit of the difference of 4%, what's happening to the monies of the bond, and the sliding dollar, rupee, and so on. And yes, we need some answers. Thank you very much, Mr. Eran Wickramaratne. And that's the way it was on Newsline this wonderful Wednesday morning, the 13th of June. So take care and God bless.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.